Welcome back to my penultimate Kerbal Space Program video of 2024, and I'm pretty happy with how this one came out. I have always been a really big fan of building small-scale stuff in Kerbal Space Program. I've done miniaturized versions of the Apollo missions, like a tiny Saturn V. I've done small space stations, small surface bases, but one thing I was shocked to actually come to the realization of is that I've never built a micro-scale space shuttle. And these have been pretty popular on YouTube. I know Shadows owns a couple of micro shuttles over the years, and I thought I would join the trend as well. And so here we are in the vehicle assembly building, or spaceplane hangar I should say, constructing the shuttle. Now I kind of set the scale by having those, I don't know what they're called, those tail fins to serve as our main wing structures, and then that sets the scale for the rest of the shuttle. I also wanted an open cockpit because, you know, looks so cool, doesn't it? The little Kerbal just sitting at the front there. Now, I wanted this shuttle to not just be like a cool little micro-scale, like, good-looking thing, and that's all it is. I wanted it to be functional. It's going to have a functional cargo bay, and I wanted the cargo bay doors to open like the real shuttle's cargo bay doors. So they open, well, you can see like a barn door. I don't know if that's got a specific name, that method of opening, but, you know, a door on either side of the cargo bay. And I wanted to have lots of delta V such that it could place a payload in moon orbit. So there we are. That's the challenge. It's got to have enough delta V to get to, like I say, low Mun orbit, and it's got to be able to deploy payload. Now, in terms of the payload, the vehicle itself is completely stock, like stock KSP with the DLCs, but there's no like probe cores in stock KSP that are small enough to fit inside our cargo base. So I am using a modded probe core to serve as our deployable payload. It's from the KNES mod. So if you want to have that specific part, then that's where it's from. As you can see, I constructed a little sort of cute cockpit instrumentation panel using the science experiments at the front there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So the way I'm able to squeeze lots of delta V into this really tiny package is by having it powered by an ion engine when it's on orbit. So ion engines are rubbish. They don't really work in atmosphere, but they're very, very efficient when you're in the vacuum of space. So we're going to use, it's kind of like the opposite way round to the real space shuttles. We've got the two side-mounted boosters or engines. They're going to be what we use to, you know, reach orbit. And then we have the central engine that's used on orbit. So the real space shuttle was the other way round. So it's the center engines that powered it to space, and then the two side boosters were used for kind of in-space maneuvering. So yeah, kind of, obviously, you know, it's not meant to be a realistic recreation of the NASA space shuttle, right? But yeah, I can see I'm doing a few little test flights here and there to make sure it's stable in flight. To be honest, it didn't fly particularly well, because, like, you know, look at it. But that's kind of, like, true to the real space shuttle, right? I had the nickname the Flying Brick because it descended at a very rapid rate compared to, I guess, a normal aircraft. Like, I had a really bad glide ratio. So that's that be the aircraft. I decided to add a little SAS wheel at the back, a little bit of part clipping involved there, but I think, you know, the amount of unused space being used, that could easily have been filled in by kind of smaller Xenon tanks if they hypothetically existed. So I don't think any of the part clipping is too egregious. As you can see, we have now moved on to the vehicle assembly building where we can now construct the booster, I guess. Now, I wanted this to be a NASA-style space shuttle in that we have an external fuel tank with two solid rocket boosters either side, with the shuttle kind of mounted to the side. But, you know, those thumper boosters there, they just do not have the range to get this thing to orbit or to space. They run out of fuel way too early, and then the thrust-to-weight ratio of the remaining stack is just way too low to get anywhere. So I did unfortunately have to have a bit of a compromise where we have kind of a central engine on the booster with the two solid rocket boosters helping. So that engine on the middle of the stack on the external fuel tank won't fire until the solid rocket boosters deplete. So yeah, it's kind of like a weird mixture of both the NASA space shuttle and the Soviet Buran shuttle. Overall, I'm very, 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 very happy with the way this came out. Just as happy as I am with the Opera browser and how it's transformed my daily browsing habits and productivity. Let me tell you about Opera One R2, the new generation of Opera browser. It's been reimagined for how we work, play, and create. Let me show you what it can do. With the sidebar player, you can control your music and videos effortlessly. Whether it's Spotify, YouTube Music, or Apple Music, you can pause, skip, or adjust without switching tabs. Personalize your browsing with dynamic themes. From animated backgrounds to custom browser sounds, you can create a vibe that's uniquely yours. Choose Classic, Aurora, or Midsummer, or Mix and Match. Need to multitask? Split Screen makes it simple. Drag a tab down to open 2 pages side by side. Perfect for comparing documents, keeping chat open while streaming, or cross-referencing tabs. Stay focused with the ARIA command line. Just press Ctrl or Command + to ask questions or search, all without opening a new tab. Plus, ARIA's AI goes further with image generation and recognition. Create images from scratch with a simple prompt, or upload an image to get instant insights. Opera is free, so what are you waiting for? Transform your web browsing today and use my link to download. And here we go. We're going to do a big countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I probably turned the thrust limiter down on the SRBs. Probably turned it down a little bit too much. We didn't have great thrust to weight ratio upon takeoff, but we quickly kind of start ascending very nicely through the lowest parts of the atmosphere. You can see those, are they called the Cub engines on the shuttle? Really working hard to keep this thing flying stable. Now, we're flying kind of like the NASA space shuttle initially, in that we're kind of falling backwards on ourselves, so the space shuttle is underneath the stack. But when we switch to kind of this configuration, we have the engine on the external fuel tank firing and no SRBs, the whole thing becomes very unstable unless we flip over. So I'm now going to have auto SAS hold us prograde, and then we just quickly roll over so that we're now on top of the external fuel tank, and then we can just continue with the ascent. Now you might be thinking, Matt, it's a bit weird that you didn't use all your engines upon liftoff, right? You just waited until the SRBs burned out before firing the quote-unquote main engine on that external fuel tank. A real rocket would never work that way. Aha! But a real rocket really exists that does exactly that. It's the Indian launch vehicle, the Launch Vehicle Mark III, which I just fact-checked myself just now to make sure this was correct. I always referred to this as the GSLV, Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle Mark III. Wikipedia says that it's now called Launch Vehicle Mark III. So there you are. But yeah, it basically, the first stage consists, it's a bit like an Ariane 5 kind of layout, right? Or an SLS layout where you got 2 solid rocket boosters and then a central core stage. The core stage doesn't ignite on liftoff. It's just the 2 solid rocket motors. The core stage activates later on. So yeah, kind of a quirky little rocket design and very similar to this one. So this little space shuttle, it's like an homage of the NASA space shuttle, the Soviet shuttle, the Indian launch vehicle Mark III. It really brings the world together. Basically, this mission, I want this to bring peace to the world. That's what I'm going for with the design of this miniature space shuttle in Kerbal Space Program. But there we are. As you can see, we have now detached the external fuel tank. I guess unlike the NASA space shuttle, we do actually have a very small fuel reserve on board here, just because I wanted to be able to circularize using our rocket engines without the need for the external fuel tank, and I didn't quite trust the ion engine to have enough thrust-to-weight ratio to perform the circularization, so yeah. And we got a little bit of extra fuel, which ended up coming in a little bit handy in ways that you will find out later on as the video progresses. But we've got about 270, it's gone now, I think it was about 270 meters per second of delta V in those chemical rocket engines. But now, of course, we can switch to our xenon and electric-powered Dawn engine. So the delta V readout on the left-hand side of the screen is incorrect. We have far more than 284 meters per second of delta V in this stage. The total delta V of the entire vehicle is shown on the Kerbal Engineer Redux readouts at the top, and it's saying we've got 2,192 meters per second. So that's kind of like the actual figure that we were working with. At least that's what I thought. Turned out we didn't have quite that much, because the fuel levels that we ended up working with for this mission, well, it was very tight. I was seriously worried we were going to be running out of fuel before we made it back home. I'm now in editing land, looking at the screen while I'm narrating over this, and I see that there is another delta V level readout on the first stage. So I think that's our true delta V for the Dawn engine, but for some reason it's displaying, do you see what I mean? Like, I'll put an arrow there. Like, that delta V number is associated with the 2 side boosters, supposedly. but that seems to be an accurate representation of how much delta V we actually have in this stage. So yeah, that's the delta V number. Kind of weird, not quite sure why that happened or what happened, but whatever, that's the thing. Now the thing with ion engines is that they don't just run on fuel, they run on electricity. And we don't have much electric charge on board this thing. I tried to cram as many batteries in it as I possibly could, but I didn't want to, make us too heavy. And those solar panels, they are quite small. They can't generate that much power. So I had to split our burn to the mun across several orbits, because as you can see, our engine can only burn for so long. We can't really get to the mun on a single burn. So I'm making, I think it was 4 burns in total, or 5 burns, I can't quite remember. We did like that at Kerbin periapsis to reach the mun, and then we will circularize at mun, get into a nice low orbit and deploy our satellite, and then have a panic when we realize, or I will have a panic when I realize I didn't have as much fuel left as I thought I would. At this point when I was filming the mission, I was like, ion engines, they've basically got unlimited range, so I'm not even going to bother looking at our fuel levels. So I literally didn't really look at my fuel levels for this mission, because I probably would have been a bit more conscious, and I'm like, oh my goodness, actually, we should probably revert to the vehicle assembly building and maybe add another xenon tank. But, I was just living in bliss. I was in my happy place. I was flying my space shuttle. I was plotting our final burn that was going to get us all the way to the mun. I was having a whale of a time, let me tell you guys. So, yeah, but it all worked out fine in the end. It just made things a little bit trickier when it came to getting back to the Kerbal Space Center. So, in terms of our mun orbit altitude, I went with 30 kilometers. Whenever I do mun missions these days, I don't know if it's always been the case with my channel, maybe Matt Lowne historians can let me know in the comment section below, but I generally always go for 30 kilometer orbits when circularizing around the mun to do either missions like this, or we're going to mun orbit, or if we're going to do a mun landing and we need to circularize around the mun first, I always go for 30 kilometers. I don't know why, it just seems like a nice round number, and I think in the older versions of KSP, where your time warp was locked to a really obnoxiously low number if you were below a certain altitude, I think 30 kilometers was that altitude, so anything lower than 30 kilometers, you were limited to really, really low time warp values, so I can't quite remember, but it's just a force of habit, what can I say? I've been in the game too long, guys. I've got habits that I can't break. I'm very set in my ways, in many ways. So that was a good sentence. And that is just one of the ways in which I am indeed set in my ways. So, let's move on. Because we have now circularized at the mun, and we have a staggering 139 meters per second of delta V remaining. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a tricky situation to get back. But before deploying our payload, I decided to take Bill Kerman on a little spacewalk, and had this weird phenomenon happen where he didn't turn around, like he was just, do you know what I mean? Like I was pressing W on the keyboard and he stayed facing me. Have you guys ever had this happen? Where your Kerbal basically is really hard to control. He wouldn't spin around and like fly properly. I have no idea what caused this. I tried like opening the map screen and closing the map screen. I think at one point I switched to the space shuttle and back again briefly, and that didn't fix it either. So I have no idea why this happened, but yeah, so it was a bit tricky to get Bill Kerman back on board the plane. There we are. It probably looked a bit easier on like the footage because I edited it and sped it up in places where it was boring, but yeah, at the time I was like, oh, this is really strange. Anyway, now it's time to open up our cargo bay doors, and there we are, undock the docking port that was holding it in place, and ta-da! It's the satellite's too big to leave. So luckily I could just use time warp and have it just morph through the floor of the cargo bay. But yeah, that was a bit embarrassing there. There are smaller probe cores available in the mod that I got that probe core from, the KNES mod, so I guess should have just used one of those. But you know, I say it's just for the fun of the video, right? It's not actually like a critical thing that needed to actually be there. But it does have a function, that satellite. We can switch to it, and I will show you. But I'm not editing this video as I'm talking. I've already edited it, so now I just have to wait for the footage to get there. There we are. So now we can right click it and we can run a little experiment. We can log geodesy and then transmit it back to Kerbin. So I guess we really didn't need to deploy it because like we could have just kept it on the space shuttle and then transmitted it that way and even recovered it. But I'm just saying this is more like an illustrative, like nice thing to do on this mission. So that's why. Anyway, what does log geodesy mean? I'm not quite sure in the context of this modded part, but like, because the phrase log geodesy sounds kind of a weird thing to say in real life, but In real life, geodesy refers to the study of a planet's shape, gravity field, and surface features, so I don't know if our satellite has mapped out the Mun now, or logged any surface features or what, but hey, like I said, this is all ultimately a meaningless exercise as I am playing with a fully unlocked tech tree, so this is really just for showcasing gameplay footage rather than trying to actively accomplish something. Anyway, it turned out that the reason we were able to make maneuver nodes was because we had that probe core on board. Now it's gone, I can't make maneuver nodes anymore because Bill Kerman is an engineer. He's not a pilot, Kerbal. I really should have brought Jebediah or Valentina with me, but I just wanted to bring Bill because, you know, Miss Bradley Winston's content, and he would often make videos torturing Bill, putting him on a little lawn chair like this for centuries on end, making him go to like Elu or beyond. And so Bill, we obviously know he's built different and can withstand situations such as this on a very sketchy space shuttle with no real protection aside from the helmet on his face. But yes, in hindsight, I probably should have used a pilot Kerbal or put a very tiny probe core on board that would allow me to make maneuver nodes. Whatever, you live and learn. It's not, we really need maneuver nodes at this stage because we're just going back to Kerbin. As you can see, I was sort of rambling at the time, but we ran out of fuel in our xenon gas containers, which meant that I had to switch to our liquid fuel oxidizer-powered rocket engines. Luckily, you know, we have enough fuel to get our Kerbin periapsis to intercept its atmosphere. I aimed for 50 kilometers, so I initially overshot, then I had to do a correction and overshot again, then I did another burn and got ourselves on a nice 50-kilometer periapsis trajectory, which is perfect height to perform an aerobrake and get ourselves into a low Kerbin orbit. Well, get ourselves ready to circularize into a low Kerbin orbit. We'll end up on a sub-orbital trajectory, of course, but we will be able to just correct that once we reach apoapsis. And there you are. As you can see, that little temperature gauge there at the front, that's Bill. Bill is definitely the weakest part of this space shuttle. Who'd have thought that the space frogs don't do well withstanding the hypersonic re-entry speeds? So yeah, we're going to have to kind of keep the nose up to make sure that Bill is sheltered enough from the heat of re-entry so that he doesn't explode. So yeah, so there we are. We've air braked pretty well. Our apoapsis is at 73 kilometers. I believe I raised that slightly, yeah, to 75. Then we can circularize apoapsis. We've got less than 100 meters per second of delta V remaining at this stage, 80 meters per second right now, and we're going to use all of that to perform our deorbit burn, which is going to present a little bit of a challenge because, like I said, guys, this thing does not fly very well. It has horrible glide ratio. It falls a lot faster than it glides, and you might have seen when in the build time lapse I left in some of the test flights, and it stalls very, very easily. So it's going to be really, really tricky to fly, and we haven't got any engines to sort of help bail us out of a stall or, you know, course correct if we're not quite getting to the Kerbal Space Center optimally. I can't do any of that. So we're going to have to try and get to the Kerbal Space Center using nothing but gliding. So yeah, it's the mission's nearly over, but the hardest part is definitely yet to come. So here we go. I don't know why we got that human V2 probe highlighted, by the way. I was trying to, you can probably see the mouse move over it just there. I was trying to like right click it to get rid of that text. I closed the map screen and reopened it, and for some reason it wouldn't disappear. I have no idea what a human V2 probe is. I suspect it might be from my Jets to Space video, but I can't really remember, to be honest. So once I've done a video, guys, it's just gone. It's out of my brain. I remember nothing about it. Next week, by the way, is going to be a video looking back at all my videos I made in 2024. So that's a good setup for that, isn't it? So anyway, here we go. We're performing our retrograde burn. I decided to kind of execute this as we were passing over the desert airfield launch site. I kind of did a couple of trial and error re-entries and messed around and used F5 and F9 to try and figure out where the best place to perform our deorbit burn would be. And my trial and error resulted in burning exactly over the desert airfield launch site. So yeah, it's just finding out how the sausage is made here, guys. This isn't just one uncut mission. I'm not that good at KSP. I do kind of cut around quick saves and quick loads where I can, just to make the video kind of flow a little bit better. Anyway, here we are, preparing to re-enter. I decided to toggle the pitch controls of that front elevon that sort of clipped into the front of the fuselage there to an action group, because having that thing active whilst just re-entering made the vehicle a lot more unstable. But we do need that elevon for performing our final landing, because without it, the vehicle just does not pitch up enough to perform a safe landing. So that's kind of why you might have seen me messing around with the action group window just there. Anyway, there are the mountains that are just ahead of the Kerbal Space Center. We have navigation activated on our nav ball. That little green flag is where we're aiming. And we can just about see the little peninsula on which the Kerbal Space Center's runway sits. So now it's a case of just aiming towards it. So I realized I had to point fairly close to prograde because pitching up too much would result in too much drag and we would fall short of the runway. But if we point, directly prograde too long, build curve is just going to overheat and explode. So I was kind of like it was a fine line to walk, this. The Kerbal Space Center's peninsula, for those who don't know, it's where the ground is a little bit lighter, basically where Bob's head is right now. The ground, mercifully, is much lighter than the surrounding area, so it's really easy to pick out from a distance. But that's where we're heading. And as you can see, our surface velocity is now rapidly decreasing. We no longer have a temperature gauge of doom appearing over Bill's head, which means we are through the most dangerous part of re-entry. Now we just have to make sure we don't stall the spacecraft and we can glide it back to the runway okay. And we've already messed up there. Yes, it's not very well aerodynamically balanced at all. And like I said, the main wings are just tail fins. They're not really designed to be used as wings like I'm using it in this aircraft here. So yeah, doesn't fly very well. Luckily, I was able to recover from the stall, preserving a fair amount of our velocity. So we should, we're basically directly ahead. We should be able to make it back to the Kerbal Space Center's runway with this. But I was having to, you can see how carefully and precisely I'm trying to make this thing get there. We have to sort of balance, flying down to pick up speed and then pitching up. If we pitch up too much, we'll end up stalling. So we kind of have to sort of flip-flop between nose diving to pick up speed, then pitching up to move forward, then nose diving a little bit, and then pitching forward again. And that's how I'm kind of nursing this thing back to the runway. Because look at our speed. It's really low. You don't really want to be going below 50 meters per second, especially with a craft with as poor a glide to ratio as this one. But look at this. We are now perfectly positioned over the runway. So we can deploy our landing legs and just doing this danger dive with our nose up at the very last minute. Now, you might have caught a little stealth quick load just there. On my first attempt at landing this, I tried to land it in air quotes properly by having the rear wheels touch the ground first and then the front wheel. But whenever I did that, the rear wheels would just bounce and the thing would just tumble over and explode. So I had to make sure that all three wheels touched the ground at the same time so that we could land safely. And, well, that's exactly what we've done. I don't know if safely is really an appropriate word to use when talking about this craft and this flight, because you guys just saw the last 22 minutes, right? But, yeah, as you can see, as I said earlier, Bill Kerman, he's just built different. He's better than us. He's Bill Kerman, what can I say? He flew from Lowne orbit all the way to the Kerbal Space Center without even having the ability to perform, or to create maneuver nodes. There we are. We can get him. We can just to waddle him over to the wing of his aircraft. You can get a nice little photo opportunity to celebrate this monumentous occasion. There's no ground support crew has come out to greet him. You'd think at least one person would have bothered to show up to say hello to him, but what can I say? He's Bill Kerman. He's humble. He's as humble as he is brilliant. And speaking of people that are brilliant, the names on the right, of course, are there. They're my Patreon supporters and my YouTube channel members who really make all of this content possible. So thank you so much, sincerely, if your name is there. And I hope you guys have a great Christmas. I realize now it's, where was it, the 20th? You guys know, the 21st? You guys watching this? So we're really, really close. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you one last time for 2024 next week. See you then.